Just a Concerned Citizen by Damos on AO3. Chapter 12 The Pass. It wasn't that Izuku was out of lead, exactly. It was more that he had come to a dead end on the one lead he really thought was right. Harera Pharmaceuticals was, in fact, a legitimate business. Most of what they produced were painkillers, and in terms of company scandals, all he could find were higher ups taking early retirements because of harsh allegations. But Mindjack had seen the truck pulling into the place, had confirmed with his own hands the smoke bomb materials. There was clearly something else going on there that Hiziku wasn't finding. The pro hero had started the agonizing, slow process of getting a warrant so he could investigate the place undercover. It was still probably going to take a few days at least, and that was with the threat of Quirk's presence on the line. Apparently, the line of evidence linking the place Shinsou had followed the van from originally the rest of the crimes was weak, but the movement of weapon materials into the building was enough to keep them from dismissing the idea entirely. He dug up all there was to find on the company in less than 3 hours, including blueprints of the building, which he'd happily sent along to Mindjack before he lost the ability to focus entirely. The web of leads was ever growing, but to him, everything pointed to one suspiciously unsuspicious company that he couldn't do anything more about. Down in the formidable bunker they had him in, wasn't much way of distraction. Sure, he had the internet, but at this point, using it for anything but the case made him feel guilty. He idly looked into one of the men Tokoyami had captured after the trap, only to be faced with nothing much more of a note. Not much online presence from him, and no family he could find. Likely just a thug who had been hired to cause a commotion. In fact, he was alone most of the time, though he was sure that was someone. In fact, he was alone most of the time, though he was sure that there was someone watching the security cameras that lined the halls. The only real change in his routine was when Mindjack or Shoto would join him. Mindjack would appear at random hours and usually nod off somewhere, but Shoto would quickly sit at the table with him and do paperwork. No different from doing it at my desk, he claimed, and you look like you could use the company. Izuku couldn't puzzle out why he was doing it, and he was too afraid to ask. The assumption that Shoto was just being a good hero at war in his head with, no, that's not just because of our jobs. It was during one of those strange evenings where Shoto was sitting quietly with him that he finally decided that if he couldn't focus anyways, and if the heroes were working so hard, maybe he could do something nice for them. He took a deep breath and tried not to stutter too badly to the pro hero. Shoto, sir. He offered a shaky smile as the hero turned, his unreadable stare at him. I was wondering if you had any idea on, when Mindjack is coming back today? The only indication that Shoto gave that he thought it was a strange question was a slight downward quirk to one side of his mouth. If you need to pass on some information. Ah, no! Izuku waved his hands around. Nothing like that, well, he's been working so hard. Not that you haven't been either. And when I have trouble focusing, I try to distraction. So I thought I could do something for you guys. And maybe even cook everyone dinner or something. I see. Shota's expression did not change, but Izuku got the distinct expression that he was being teased. Well, he should be back earlier than usual, since he's mostly doing paperwork right now. I'll let him know. Said Izuku, brightly. Okay. As it turned out, the security room he'd been living in had just about the same supplies of groceries that the safe room did. Canned food, dried goods, all things meant to last, so they didn't have to be replaced all the time. He wound up making a weird vegetable and rice dish that was somewhere between a stir-fry and a pilaf. It wasn't bad, though, especially not once he found a can of coconut milk and made some sort of curry to go with it. And it was totally worth the effort when Shinsou arrived and stood in the doorway, face scrunched in confusion, as he looked from the dish on the table to the pot still on the hot plate. When you said there would be dinner here, I wasn't expecting. The two pro heroes shared a series of looks and raised eyebrows that were totally unintelligible before Shota turned to Izuku. Did you cook this? With the stuff here? Yeah, I was kind of going for a home-cooked meal, but, well, you work with what you have. Well, it smells good, Shota said, suspiciously as he sat down, and then tentatively took a bite. He frowned into his bowl, and for a brief moment, Izuku panicked, an apology on the tip of his tongue. Before he could, Shota said, Well, this is just unfair. The most coherent reply Izuku could manage was, Huh? Shinsou just pointed his chopstick at him. That you can cook, too. I don't know why I thought otherwise, but if this is what you can make out of shelf-stable garbage, then I want to know what you can make when you have access to actual groceries. Oh, well, Izuku blushed and ducked his head. Maybe as a celebration when we're done, if you guys want? It's really nothing special, though. It's better than anything either of us can do, I promise you that, Shota said. There was a thump of what was probably someone kicking someone else under the table, though no one's expression changed, and Izuku couldn't tell who had attacked whom. He stared a little obviously as both heroes dug into their dinners. They didn't seem to be pretending for his sake, and he'd never seen either of them eat anything but takeout. But his cooking wasn't really anything special, and not in a downplaying his skills sort of way. He had nothing on his mom, and it wasn't like she had a professional chef or anything either. Did UA not have home economics class or something? Maybe it was cut out of the hero course curriculum? Did the heroes he was sitting with not know how to cook? The thought almost made him laugh out loud, as embarrassing as that would be, and he only saved by Shoto deciding to make conversation by asking, So, how did you get into this line of work? Izuku had to remind himself not to freak out. Shoto, more than likely already knew, and in fact had managed to remember that without the smile even dropping from his face. He was nosy. Right. I just noticed things that didn't seem right sometimes, and I figured someone should know. Freelancing. Remarked Shinsou, dryly. He was literally a concerned citizen. Izuku thought he had learned enough of Shota's body language by now to recognize the single blink as a, I'm taken aback by this answer. Then it was Izuku's turn to be taken aback himself, as Shinsou continued. I always meant to ask, but where did you learn your analysis from? Just practice, I guess? Izuku scratched at one of his cheeks subconsciously. I used to do it for a hobby when I was a kid. Analysis as a hobby? Shota looked intrigued, at which Shinsou rolled his eyes. Says the guy who keeps bonsai. Shota shot back. Says the guy who keeps bonsai. Shinsou shot back. Shota squinted, and that did draw a small chuckle from Izuku. Despite the circumstances, down here in between the two very intimidating pro heroes, he felt more comfortable talking about himself than he had in years. It felt like he was amongst friends. Yeah, I know it sounds silly now, but back then I wanted to be a hero, even though I'm... He tried to laugh off the fact that he still didn't want to say the word quirkless, but it was breathy and unbelievable. I thought that if I just paid really close attention and studied everything, I could about heroes that I could be one too, you know? But, I mean, I'm glad I ended up being useful for something, you know? Maybe I should have kept my mouth shut, Izuku thought, or at least said something else less depressing, because his explanation had the hero sharing another unreadable look, and his appetite disappearing. Still, eating was preferable to look up and seeing whatever pitying looks the other two had for him. So he buried his face into his rice, and subsequently jumped when Shoto, even voice, said, "So you don't want to be here anymore?" Izuku froze. Did he? It was a question he'd been avoiding seriously asking himself for years because the answer hurt too bad. Of course, he did. He wanted nothing more than to save people, to make them feel safe, to help. But I can't. He didn't look up, didn't see the looks of commiseration the heroes had shared. But you would, if you could. Shinsou's voice was even, carefully devoid of pity. Izuku dipped his head further down regardless. I can't, he insisted. Even if I was strong enough to make a difference, getting a license at my age would require hero agency to sponsor me, taking the test, which would mean I'd have to impress a hero enough to want to give me a chance. Shinsou snorted, and that was enough for Izuku to finally look up and see the pro covering his face. That probably won't be as hard as you're thinking. His eyes snapped over to where Shoto nodded in agreement. Izuku forgot to breathe. What were they? No, they couldn't be implying. That's not very funny. God, he hadn't felt like this since middle school. Face red, eyes filled with tears that he was desperately trying to keep from falling. Only, unlike back then, Shinsou didn't keep taunting him, didn't shove him down or hit him. Shinsou very slowly and deliberately moved his bowl of food aside and leaned forwards into Izuku's space. The smile he was hiding was replaced with an expression far more serious. That's good, because it wasn't a joke. Midoriya, I work with a lot of people whose quirks I don't even know all the time, and they don't have half the brain you do. A dark look passed over his eyes, just long enough for Izuku to see it. Believe me when I say that I know what it's like for people to tell you can't be a hero. And clearly, the people who said that are wrong about me. Personally, I think that with the right training, you'd make an excellent hero. Fat tears had started rolling down his cheeks. No one had ever... I agree, added Shoto. To be honest, you might be thinking too highly of our profession. There are plenty of heroes out there who aren't good people, who only got the jobs because of their quirks. I'd rather seeing someone with good attitude be the next hero than a fame seeker. Shinsou turned his too intense gaze away from Izuku, back to squint at Shoto. Bold words coming from number 7 hero. Every time I'm forced to give a press conference, I regret not going underground with every fiber of my being. Like you could make it underground, pretty boy. I'm flattered to know you think I'm pretty. The exchange was enough to draw a wet laugh from Izuku, drawing him out of the spiral just enough that he didn't start sobbing on Mind Jack's shoulder again. The hero in question shifted back in his chair. Well, no one here is going to force you into doing anything you aren't ready for, but I'm sure someone will be willing to train you once this case is over. Shoto nodded. And before then, you're free to use the gym we have here. You have to be supervised, but we have enough heroes and sidekicks that it's in use all the times anyways, so it wouldn't be difficult. Izuku felt hot, his stomach rolling sick with shame and worry and embarrassment. Somehow, he had tricked these two into thinking he was worth something. He should say no. Shouldn't get his hopes up, because he knew they'd be dashed and broken as soon as the hero realized just how wrong they were. He couldn't, though. Couldn't bring himself to. Saying that would mean a future where returned to living alone in his one-bedroom apartment, only leaving it to be harassed at work. And as crazy as everything had been since he started sending emails, he liked it. For a long time, he felt nothing but numb. And sure, sometimes things had been sad or terrifying or embarrassing, but this had made him happy, too. He knew that if he said no, he'd be giving that up again. That's what he's been doing. Even pretending to help make him happier than he's ever been in years. But he couldn't quite bring himself to say yes, either. So, voice almost too wrecked to speak, he said, I do miss going to the gym. Hitoshi dragged himself through the doors of Shoto's agency, with a pondering headache and a barely concealed scowl. It made sense that they didn't want him to be the one to infiltrate the factory after everything that had happened. Whoever was behind everything clearly knew who he was and was keeping an eye on him. And Vlad Black was a great hero, especially for this sort of thing. It was just, well, it was all too personal, which meant it was good. He hadn't gone, but still. And on top of that, he was delivering some bad news today, too. He kept the file clutched tight in his hands as he made his way down to the security area. Midoriya wouldn't be happy to hear about this at all. Midoriya. The fact that he still wanted, to be a hero was unsurprising, as it was heartbreaking. Hitoshi had been there, though not for as long as the green-haired man. And he had still been desperate to be a hero when he'd been offered help. He jumped at the first real chance he was given. Midoriya had already given up. Convincing him to accept help would itself take work, if that was something he'd wanted to do. He'd have to be real damn careful about it, though the fact that he accepted Shota's offer to use the gym had been a good start. So he shouldn't have been surprised when he peeked into the room Midoriya had been staying in and found himself in workout clothes. And it hadn't fazed him, normally, but Izuku was wearing a tank top that showed off more of his shoulders and chest than normal. They were covered in scars, clearly old, faded, and stretched. Most of it the same color as the rest of his skin, only really standing out because of the different texture, and normally, Hitoshi would have cataloged it and moved on. They looked bad, but they weren't recent. But instead he froze. Hitoshi had a scar that looked exactly the same, if much smaller, and he was pretty sure Midoriya hadn't gotten his in a high school training accident. He must have stared too long because Midoriya looked up from whatever he was doing to catch him, and they both had a light flush of embarrassment on their cheeks. As tempted as he was to say nothing, he knew the better thing to do was to settle it now. So, he moved to sit in the chair next across to the green-haired man. You don't have to answer, but do you mind telling me where you got those scars? The small smile Midoriya had shown him disappeared in an instant, eyes going wide and looking anywhere but him. They're from middle school, just an old quirk accident. And shit. Okay, that answered a lot more than Midoriya probably thought it did. That wasn't something Ground Zero had done. That was something Bakugo Katsuki had done. And he didn't know if it was better or worse. He also didn't think that those scars looked much like an accident. Instead of figuring out what to say right now, he rolled up one of his sleeves. His own scar was on the side of his left elbow, similarly faded, though his was through the help of Recovery Girl. And Midoriya was smart. As soon as he saw it, his back went rimrod straight, realizing it for what it was. I think I get it. At least a little bit, he said carefully. Midoriya was clenching his fists so tight that his nails were biting into his skin, and Hitoshi had a strong urge to take them in his own. He's better now, and it's not a big deal, just kid stuff. If you're telling me he was worse, then I'm more unimpressed with him than I already am. Hitoshi had only really met Bakugo in his second year, but he heard the rumors of just how aggressive he'd been before. Midoriya just looked down, refusing to meet his eyes. Hitoshi bit his lip and leaned back. Midoriya needed to be pushed to accept help, but he wasn't sure if an old wound was the place to start doing it. He could drop it. Could hope that letting Midoriya know that he knew and was willing to do something about it was enough. Was it worth the risk of contacting Bakugo again to try and get more information? Saying what he'd done was enough to make him regret messaging him in the first place, and if Ground Zero had a mind for it, there was only so much Hitoshi could do to stop the current number 4 from seeing whoever he wanted to. He hadn't seemed that interested in Midoriya, but he hadn't seemed disinterested either, and that could change if we brought him up again. He didn't end up taking Midoriya's hand, but he did put his own hand on top, just long enough for Midoriya to blink and look up at him with glassy eyes. Fuck, how did he keep managing to run into such emotional topics? I said, you don't have to tell me anything, but I'm here to listen if you need. Do you want to hear the news I brought? He hesitated. It's all so bad. That didn't seem to matter much to Midoriya, who nodded, likely thankful for the distraction. He took the file back and handed it to Midoriya, and as the man read it, his eyes changed from a tired, resigned sadness to an angrier one. He knew what was inside. Aya Nakano, the girl that Midoriya had saved, on the night that had started all this mess, had gone missing. Alright, I have some notes. I've been doing good in, jotting down notes now. I kind of stopped jotting notes on my, sticky notes, but I'm getting better at jotting notes, so I actually have detailed notes at the end of the chapter, not missing my points that I wanted to talk about while recording. Anyways, so my first note is Izuku's cooking skills. Mans has cooking skills, and I'm jealous. I am very, very much jealous. Also, I have multiple fics where Izuku is horrible at cooking, and then Izuku is great and brilliant at cooking, and then, yeah, so either he's really bad or he's really good. There's no in between. No, I'm joking. There has been some in-betweens where he's decent, but he's not necessarily great, but he's not necessarily bad. But, it's just hilarious how he's either bad, he's good, or he's average. Never, above average or anything like that. I think in this one he's either... The fact that he was willing, able to cook something with such... Yeah, no, I feel like his cooking skills are good. Very good. Yeah. Alright. So, let's talk about the whole, Izuku being able to be a hero. I love that. And I love how... It breaks my heart that his first reaction is, don't freaking mess with me. But then he realized, oh, these heroes aren't messing. And from there, he gets the idea that somehow he tricked them into thinking that he was worth something, which, Izuku, no, you are worth something. But you know what? It makes sense. This is literally his programming. He's programmed to think that he's worthless, that he isn't worth all this trouble. He isn't worth all of this. And it breaks my heart to see him like this. It truly does, and it makes me want to start crying, because, he's worth so much more. I'm gonna cry. Cry. God damn it, this channel making me cry. Okay, I want to talk about Todoroki being sassy. I see a lot of fics where obviously Hitoshi's sassy because, Hitoshi, right? But I don't see many fics where Shoto Todoroki is sassy, and I need more of that. He is a sassy motherfucker, and you can't tell me otherwise. But he's sassy not in the sense of Hitoshi being sassy in the sassy sense. He's sassy in a neutral sassy sense. So while, Hitoshi would say something like, that's interesting. Shoto would say it that's interesting. That's interesting. A more neutral tone while still having that sarcastic demeanor behind it. Just more neutral. Well, one says it, that's interesting. The other just says, that's interesting. In the sense of, no, that's not really interesting, I'm being sassy, but, saying it in a neutral kind of tone. Although I feel like in those moments, he would release just a tad bit of emotion. If you feel emotion coming from Shoto, just know that he's being sassy. I love that. That's my headcanon. That is my headcanon. And I love it. That's all my notes for today. Apart from, obviously, the end part, the whole Bakugo hand... scar thingy, and then that one girl going missing again, because that fucking sucks. Imagine you practically, kind of risk your life for this person, and then it ends up being in vain because that person ends up getting kidnapped anyways. That sucks. But yeah, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or a night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching!